Hello and welcome to another episode of Taking Control of Cancer, the podcast brought to you by the North East London Cancer Alliance. I'm Steve Bland and this is a bit of a how-to guide to help you overcome common myths, fears, barriers to cancer prevention, diagnosis, treatment and care. We know that not all cancers are curable, not all cancers are treatable, but there are things that we can all do to support ourselves and support our loved ones. This week, I've made my way to Highgate School. We're in North London and we're talking balls and testicular cancer. I'll explain why we're here in a second, but I just want to give you a couple of facts about testicular cancer from Cancer Research UK. Around 2,400 new cases are diagnosed every year. It's the 17th most common cancer in males. Testicular cancer accounts for around 1% of all new cancer cases in males in the UK. And since the early 90s, incidence rates have gone up by 27%. We're going to talk about all of this with my two guests. James Green. James, you're a consultant urological surgeon at Barts Health. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Steve.
And Vicky Stubbs, an education expert. Vicky, I want to just start off with you because you're probably best placed to explain why we're here today and why Highgate School is significant.
Sure. Hi. So Highgate School is where I came across James for the first time when I was teaching biology here. And James was bemoaning the fact that so many boys and young men were losing testicles and getting into very serious health situations through testicular cancer. And it emerged that they just didn't know enough about it. And if they'd known more, the consequences could have been a lot less serious. So we got chatting and I said, well, why don't we try and create something that we can use as an intervention? And why don't we work? We decided together, and through all James's research he'd already been doing with colleagues, they'd already realized how important education was. So we put that together and we came up with some resources which we'll tell you more about as we go. And it all happened at Highgate School. Highgate School's been massively supportive of my time and of all the work we did together. And we tested everything on Highgate pupils as well before we took it out to the wider world.
So I called you an education expert. Just tell me about your role and your work.
So I started off, as I said, as a biology teacher here. I started off that I did that for a long time. And now I work independently in the fields of health, relationships and sex education as a consultant and a trainer, a speaker and a resource creator.
James, how do you kind of fit into this picture? Vicky's just kind of explained it a little bit, but how do you fit in?
Well, I used to live in Highgate. I've got relationships to the school as well, and it's just that it was just very, very sad. We're talking about testicular health in general, and then obviously testicular cancer in particular. But every time a child loses a testicle for any reason, whether it's cancer or we'll touch on a bit later, torsion, it's always very, very sad for me because obviously it can have a knock-on for their whole life and can affect fertility and things like that. Even if they do well from the cancer. But, I was trying to think of a way of intervening much, much earlier because most of the problems seem to be knowledge among parents, knowledge among the children themselves, about really trying to present early. I mean, your whole, ethos behind all these podcasts is early diagnosis, but with testicular cancer, it's incredibly important because it's an incredibly high cure rate, nearly 100% of it's caught early. So it's really important to catch things early and then obviously prevent, further escalations of treatment and further problems really from that point of view. So I was really keen to see if we could actually implement something in schools to get in really early and teach relevant lessons, on health education early to see if we could actually make an impact. And we needed to trial that, needed to develop it, but obviously I'm very keen that's rolled out regionally and nationally. But you have to make these things work well and test them. So Vicky is being very modest. Vicky's got a PhD. She's got a very scientific mind, as I have, and therefore we wanted to do this properly. And everything we did, we tested, we checked, we rechecked, we made sure that it was acceptable to children of certain ages or different ages. We made sure it was acceptable to the teachers, obviously parents. We've done parent resources as well. So it's really important to make sure that, for all different types of people from all different backgrounds, this is acceptable, teaching tools to really help them learn about testicular cancer and testicular torsion, which we'll talk about perhaps briefly later, and therefore actually make sure that they get the best health outcomes because they know what's happening, they know how to examine themselves in the case of testicular cancer to check themselves, and therefore, if anything happens, something will be found at an incredibly early stage, much easier to treat, much easier to solve from that point of view.
In my intro, I mentioned accounts for around 1% of all new cancer cases in males, but before we started recording, you said that actually it's a lot more common than that in the age group we're talking about here.
Exactly. So it's really important, because it's an important point, because if you look at testicular cancer, you think, it's a rare cancer, it's very hard to do something about, but it actually isn't, because actually it's the commonest male cancer in males, teenage boys, and in young adults. So it's the commonest male cancer, and therefore it's relevant to that time in their life as well. So I think if you're teaching about things to people and it's relevant to their, in the next few years, and especially if you get people into habits of doing things, habit forming is incredibly important. So you teach people self-examination of their testicles at a young age, and they can carry it through their young life into adulthood. Again, it's very useful. So it's the most common male cancer in teenage boys and in young adults, and therefore, it's incredibly relevant to teach these things in a health education lesson.
Before we get into all the amazing work that you guys are doing here, let's just do a bit of basic understanding of what testicular cancer is and what are the symptoms. Yeah.
So basically, it's a cancer that develops in the reproductive cells in the testicle, and this is important because you can imagine nothing very much happens in your testicles until puberty. Things kick in then. So at puberty, your reproductive cells in your testicles start becoming really active. They start dividing, and it's with that activity that genetic problems can happen. You can get mutations, you get testicular cancer. That's why testicular cancer is, vanishingly rare before that age, but that's why testicular cancer is so common in this age group, in teenagers and young men, because that's when the activity of the testicle really ramps up. So that's really why it happens at that age and why it's so relevant. And how does that produce in signs? Well, it depends where it forms in the testicle. Most cancers form lumps or form masses. They're groups of cells that are dividing and growing abnormally, and they form a mass or a lump. But it depends where that is in the testicle. So if it's near the surface of the testicle, that's very easy to feel as a lump in the testicle, so you can actually feel it, and that's why self-examination is so important. The commonest way of diagnosing testicular cancer is feeling a lump. If it's more in the centre of the testicle, which doesn't often form a lump, it'll just form a larger testicle. It will be slightly abnormal, it'll feel heavier, it'll feel harder, it'll feel more dense. So those are the things to look at, and that's why it's important in the lesson, as we do, to teach about how you examine a testicle, but all the symptoms that relate to that. The other thing that's really important, Steve, which I'm not sure people appreciate, is there are risk factors for testicular cancer, but the main one is what we call an undescended testicle. It's a testicle that is not in the right place, because if a testicle is not in the scrotum and nearer to your own body, the scrotum is a place that basically cools the testicle down, because it likes to be in a slightly cooler temperature than the body, that if it's higher and it's not in the testicle, that has a much higher rate of forming cancer. So when people examine themselves, when we examine children for health checks and babies and through people's lives, it's very, very important to check that both of the testicles are in the scrotum as well, because that's really important, because that's one of the major factors that predisposes to testicular cancer. So it's feeling the testicle itself to make sure it's smooth, there's no lumps in it, etc., and not abnormal feeling, but it's also important basically to check that two normal testicles are sitting in the scrotum to start with.
Can I just chip on there, James?
Yes.
We were chatting about this the other day, and you were saying that if someone's got one of those testicles that is normally in their scrotum but occasionally zoots up, for example, when they're sexually excited, that isn't a higher risk factor?
It's not a higher risk factor, but if it's very, very mobile, a testicle, they're at more risk of torsion, and we can talk about that. Torsion, we haven't touched on it, is when the testicle can twist, interrupt its blood supply, and a testicle can die, and you can use it for that. So a hypermobile testicle is something that probably should get checked out because there's a more risk of torsion, but you're absolutely right, there's no increased risk of testicular cancer.
Okay, that's useful.
So Vicky, let's talk about the work you do here then. This is, beautiful school, amazing school, obviously very receptive to, to thinking about stuff that maybe it hasn't been done before. I can talk from my own personal experience. I'm a little bit older, I'm 44, but I don't remember anything like this, any education on testicular cancer. we just about had sex education back then, and it was,
Yeah.
I was telling you guys before, it was a chap who wasn't the clearest of orators putting a condom on a banana. That was about the extent of it. And to actually see how far we've come now, and you're going to explain all the amazing work that you've been doing, it's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really great. When I first came here more than 20 years ago to the school, we didn't actually do a huge amount of relationships and sex ed, which included the health ed around things like testicles. There was very little. We did do the banana condom thing, although then we got some rather terrifying blue rubber penises to use instead, which I'm not sure that they were a huge improvement past the banana. But I think when I first started, there were only 1 or 2 lessons on any of this stuff ever, and that was done in year 10, by which time, especially with relationships and sex things, that it was a bit late for quite a few pupils to learn things. And then we, as a group of teachers, got together and said, this isn't good enough, and started putting things together. And by the time the statutory relationships and sex ed came in, which included things like self-examination and checking yourself to know what's normal for you, we actually were doing almost everything they were asking schools to do. So Highgate is pretty good at being ahead of the game, and although I'm no longer a teacher here, I was really impressed by how we always were trying to be meeting pupils' needs long before this sort of arose. But so they enabled me to do all the checking and testing of resources, if you like, that James was describing, and I can tell you a bit about that if you like. So James came to me with a whole lot of data from the NHS and from his colleagues and what they had found about testicular cancer, and also the condition he was describing, testicular torsion, when the testicle twists. And we looked at the fact that torsion rates start to rise really rapidly from the age of about 11 or so, and testicular cancer rates, as he's already said, rise in the mid-teens and keep on going into the early 20s. So we realized that if we're educating about anything health-wise, these are things that absolutely should be covered during school years, because they could actually happen to someone while they're at school. We're not talking about some precaution they need to take for their future. We're talking about something could happen to them next week, And so despite the fact that neither condition is common, they could occur. And in fact, we have had cases of people coming to us since we developed these resources saying, thank you so much. This helped us identify this situation when it was happening. And if we hadn't had that lesson, we wouldn't have known. So we know already that what we've done has already started to have small but good impact. So he came to us with all these data. And I thought, okay, how are you going to break this barrier that you were describing about? No one used to talk about their balls in a classroom. How are you going to make that accessible and comfortable? And so we first of all looked at what sort of activities boys might be happy to do. And I thought, okay, we played with all the puns, didn't we? So we looked at things like a ball game. What kind of ball game could we do? And then we decided that actually a bunch of teenagers throwing a ball around would probably turn into something more like dodgeball, so it might not be very wise.
Could end anywhere. So.
Yeah, dodgeball with some small
dodgy
testicles.
balls. Exactly. So we decided actually to use a small beanbag.
Yeah.
It was a slightly safer and less damaging thing to chuck
In a
around.
lab like this, I imagine it wouldn't go down too well.
No, well, yeah, exactly. So you can't chuck a ball around in a lab. No. It's against the rules. So things like that, so chucking a beanbag around and having to answer a question when it lands with you, and then picking who else is going to answer the next one, and having teams and things like that. So things that guys are likely to get into and enjoy. There's also an optional bit where they make a plasticine model of a testicle and stick a bead in it and feel what the lump would feel like. And we make a sort of fake scrotum from a couple of plastic bags. And it's amazing how that sort of thing can just break the ice and make people feel comfortable. And I've been into classrooms where, not at the school, but at schools where perhaps they don't discuss anything to do with relationships, sex, bodies, anything like that, in any comfortable way. And I've had this sort of horrible tumbleweed silences at the beginning of the lesson. And by the time they've done a few of these activities, they're very relaxed and asking all sorts of completely unrelated questions, some of which are hilarious. Always a question about penis size comes up at some point.
That's kind of what I was going to ask, though. That's kind of what I was going to ask, because I've obviously been a teenage boy. James, you have too.
Yeah.
We know what teenage boys are like.
Yeah.
And I think we had a similar discussion with a charity called Cats, who we spoke to a few weeks back on the podcast, where they were talking about breast cancer awareness, and they said they got, a certain reaction, but then when they got, the kind of fake pair of breasts out and got people to kind of feel what a lump felt like, everything kind of changed.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of sounds like a similar thing here.
Yeah.
I wonder how you get, I don't know if this sounds like I'm sort of silly question, but how do you kind of get past the, boys are being boys, kind of like the sniggering, the silliness?
It's a really great question. There's a couple of things. I think one, the person doing the presenting has to be someone who's not easily embarrassed themselves, or if they are, is able to swallow that and kind of not show that, and be relaxed. And not try and sit on every bit of sniggering. Just accept that some sniggering is completely normal. Yeah. And you actually want to get the sniggering out in the first place. So you actually might even throw a couple of almost a bit of bait almost. There's sort of stuff that they can just have a giggle at and get it out the way, if you like. So hence the sort of silly games and the silly words and stuff like that.
But that's part of it, though, isn't it? That's sort of part of making it accessible.
It is,
a bit of fun.
But also,
with it as well.
I think because it's so relevant, that actually they are listening as well, and they are taking it seriously, because it's something, and it's very, you say this could happen to you, and therefore, it's got to be a fun lesson, I think, because I think people remember it more. That's why we've tried to create a lesson that's actually enjoyable, because it has to be enjoyable. It can't just be fact. It has to be, actually telling people about the symptoms and also what to do about things when you find a problem, because that's really important. People. We don't want to scare people, but actually the relevant thing is, then what to do about things. But the important thing is that it's relevant for them. So even though they may be sniggering things at the start, I think every class comes round to realise they're actually concentrating, they're taking it in, they're learning, which is the important thing, they're processing it, which is really important, and therefore that's what we hope, that it'll change behaviour. That's what we want at the end of the day. We want people to do self-examination, we want to change behaviour to present earlier, not be scared about things, not ignore things, because that's the real problem with cancer and lots of conditions. If it's left too long, if people are scared, if people don't tell somebody about it, if they don't seek medical advice, that's when the problems arise, and we're trying desperately to prevent against that. I think this lesson does this in spades. I think it's a really good, it's good from that point of view to actually change behaviour.
Well, one of the things that's a problem, particularly for teenagers, is that they are so embarrassed about talking about bodies and body changes, and boys in particular. And so we actually having a condition that occurs predominantly, or starts to occur predominantly in the very age group at which people are least likely to feel comfortable talking about their balls, or what are you telling me to feel my balls? And also for some folk that's anathema, it's just something, I'm not supposed to do that, or I certainly wouldn't tell anyone else I was going to do that, So you have to kind of almost build that trust through, as James said, a combination of this is highly relevant to you, plus if you giggle, it's okay. But the other thing that's really helpful is really early on in the lesson, I show a graph about the age of boys and when these conditions start to rise, both testicular torsion and testicular cancer. And that graph has a really big impact. You can always see whether I'm training adults and teachers, training school nurses, or because I do that as well, or whether I'm actually talking to the boys, you can just see that moment of, oh, crikey. This could be me, or this could be a kid I teach. And that really hooks you in early on.
And there's something else, you see. We've got to think there is, in some aspects of society, there is a slight taboo about this. And you're almost giving permission in the lesson. You're saying, actually, this is normal. This is what you should be doing. Testicular self-examination, it's not taboo. No. It's a completely normal, safe, reasonable thing to do to protect your own health. And that's quite a big thing, to move people from a position where, it may be seen as not correct to examine yourself, to actually take them to a place where they go, no, absolutely, it's completely normal. It's recommended, actually, and it will help you for your own health going forward. So that's where it's really important.
Even beyond testicular cancer
as
well, isn't it?
All self-examination.
This is
all
fantastic
health.
For getting kids
it is.
It's talking about with each other as
exactly.
well. They'll say to their friends.
So if you have a problem, doesn't matter what the healthcare problem is, please do this. Don't hide it away. Don't sit on it. Don't, talk to an adult. Get some help, because I think that's really important message, especially for boys, because we know that young men throughout their whole lives are very bad at accessing healthcare. They really are compared to women, and I think that's why. I mean, this lesson can be taught to girls as well, and mixed schools. It's not a problem.
Is it taught to girls as well?
It can be. Some schools, schools are doing it to both sexes, because obviously, again, girls have children, and it's important to have that knowledge base being brought up. Yes, of course.
If I just chip in on that, so what we found in our testing phases, if you like, is that if we want to come in at the age at which torsion starts to rise, in other words, teaching sort of year 7-ish, and you're teaching them everything, torsion and cancer, we find that at that age, boys are fairly excruciatingly embarrassed about having girls in the room at the same time. So at that age, we suggest that boys have this lesson and this learning by themselves, and that girls go and learn the stuff that they feel is excruciatingly embarrassing at the same time, especially complicated stuff about periods and managing periods in sport and things like that they couldn't bear to discuss with boys. So we suggest that at that age. But by the age of year 9, wasn't it? Research done by some of James's colleagues at Great Ormond Street found that actually they didn't mind at all if there were girls in the room. So it really depends on when you want to be talking about it. And if you are going to do it earlier, we then recommend sort of coming back around to it in year 9 and saying, what did you learn? And they have to teach each other about what they learned in their separate sessions.
It's not a one-off. It can be taught, to another level, to an older age group. Yeah. But the other thing it would be nice to talk about, if that's all right with you, is the fact that it's this partnership. Because I think when we're talking about health education, I think it's very hard for teachers to be confident to develop health education lessons on their own, and that's again the beauty of this. This has been rubber stamped as a very good lesson plan through the PHSE Association. And I think it gives people confidence that it's been developed by medical teams. So there's a number of us who help with this: Shabna Undre, Caroline McDonald, Nadine McCauley. Who've helped develop this from the medical point of view, but with the teaching expertise of Vicky, we've brought it together to produce this package that actually it's very reassuring that they know everything. And if you talk about stats, if we talk about evidence, if we talk about it's cast iron. It's very well researched, very well supported. So the teachers can go in with this lesson knowing that they won't be criticised about it because it's a bona fide lesson on this specific topic that they can just pull off the shelf, teach, and then that makes it easy for everybody really from that point of view.
That's something actually we've touched on a few times in this podcast, of the power of partnerships, because
exactly.
You guys go into a school probably wouldn't know how to connect with.
Well, I don't know how to do a lesson plan. I've got no idea. Parental resource.
Teachers maybe wouldn't have your expertise. So bringing it all together, same thing that we talk about when with any cancer education the Alliance has been doing, it's understanding the audience and understanding how best to connect with that audience.
Yeah,
exactly. Definitely a partnership. That's what came out. It takes longer than you think to do it well, but I think it's done on that stage. The other thing that's really interesting, I think, is syllabus, because you see in schools there's a lot to teach. There's an enormous amount to teach. And it's just really where they prioritise this amongst other things they're teaching. And I've already firmly believed that we should do much more health education in schools. I firmly believe that actually teaching relevant stuff, be it cancer or medical emergencies, what to do in those situations which they can carry through for their life. And self-examination is one of them. Self-examination is very important, in multiple situations. Then that's what we should be pushing in the UK, and that's why I fervently believe in this. And it's not just this, lesson plan. I think we should be teaching much more, but I think there should be a clearly defined syllabus that's laid out, and then schools know what they should be teaching. Because I think that's difficult for teachers. I don't know what you think.
What do schools have to teach?
So now that relationships and sex ed, for example, is statutory, there's a whole suite of things that unfortunately often viewed as sort of a bunch of boxes to tick, which is not really what you want. Yeah. What you really want to do is to be empowering people, as James said, to know how to recognise something and to know where to go when you've got a problem. And that's not just for health stuff, it's for relationship stuff, for problems of all kinds. We need to normalise conversations around this. So there is an awful lot of boxes that they have to tick, just in the same way biology curriculum includes things like heart disease. So they all have to be discussed, but what we really need to be encouraging, as I think James is hinting at, is that this is taught in a way that actually enables people to normalize conversations around these things and to express their concerns and say, I'm worried about this because great Auntie Jane had breast cancer and this is what happened. And actually, do you know what? In most cases, and so that's one of the things we emphasize with testicular cancer in these lessons is what James was saying earlier. Almost every young person who finds testicular cancer will be cured if they get there early. If you don't get there early, you might have to have chemo, you might have to have complicated treatment. It's a pain, it's a nightmare, it's really a hassle. But don't be afraid, because guess what? Find it early, job done. you know. And so that's that approach, if you like, that we're going through. And I have to say, of all the sort of stuff I teach, and I teach some easy stuff and some hard stuff, this lesson is the only one that I've ever had a standing ovation from a bunch of kids who never met me before.
That's incredible. That's amazing, though, isn't it? Because
Something on the table and everything. They were so happy
lovely.
to have such a frank conversation about bodies.
This is the thing with kids. I think we probably underestimate them a bit, don't we? Sometimes.
Yeah,
And we don't.
totally.
We think we don't want them to go there, but actually, when you,
Totally.
I've got a 9-year-old, and you know, our situation is a little bit different. You know, he knows all about cancer because his mum died from breast cancer, so he, you know, he has a very extensive knowledge of it. But you know, I would love it if he, among his mates at school, you know, were able to talk like really openly about any issues that they had, not just testicular cancer,
No, but
any health issues that they
Exactly,
had.
it's really important.
No,
and
it's
this is
true.
a way in. This is a way in. You see, I mean, we're talking about this specifically today, but actually, it's a way in that you're trying to make people realise that it's their body. They can do something about it. They can recognise things. They can be in charge. They can engage, and they can, you know, define their health going forward. Actually, it's, you know, for most health conditions, you know.
But it is also interesting when I do this training for teachers and for school nurses and stuff, and we talk about how this lesson works and what our approach is. I so often get people saying to me, "Gosh, that's so interesting," and then the ones who use it often say, "Well, I might adopt some of these ideas in the way I teach this and this and this," and so we are also hoping to spread, as James says, more than just some good teaching about testicular cancer and testicular torsion. We're hoping to actually also spread a wider
It's all about early diagnosis, recognition, accessing healthcare. It's all these things.
How we can make it accessible.
Understanding your body more broadly.
Exactly,
Isn't it?
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you see, this fits in very nicely. You see, this is why, you know, it does fit in well at this time of year, because their bodies are developing.
Yes.
You know, and, you know, testicular growth, you know, testicle grows about 6 times during puberty, you know, and so it's really important that people understand that their body's developing, things are changing, activity there's changing, but so it all links in. It's very nice.
And just to make it feel normal and less terrifying, because I think there's this whole thing about puberty and, oh gosh, teens, and aren't they hard work, and isn't it such a nightmare phase, and isn't there so much going on in your head? In actual fact, can't we just make it so much more relaxed and say, you know what, this stuff is completely normal. I do another bunch of lessons about being a teenager and the changes you're going to find in your brain and the way you think, and they always come up to me after and say, oh, thank you, I feel so relieved. And it's about that, isn't it? About making these things feel, okay, this might be weird and new to me, and some of it's a bit scary for a while, but there's things I can do to make it less so, and there's ways I can talk about it which make it much less frightening.
I was looking at some of your resources online, and obviously, you know, loads are aimed at the kids, but loads are aimed at the parents too, aren't they? And how big a part are they in all this?
So we kind of did those after the main initial testing thing, but part of the testing we did actually involve Highgate parents as well, and we asked them, you know, has your child come home and talked about this at all? And we looked at a little bit about what the perception was when that went home, and in some families the child had come home and talked about it a lot, and others were absolutely silent. I'm not talking about my balls with my mum. You know, so there was a range there, but parents by and large were totally on board and felt very supportive of this whole discussion thing, and they felt that again it provided an avenue through which they could start a conversation with a teenager.
They're probably like our age, and they haven't had the education.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's educating the parents as well.
Yeah.
And obviously, if their child comes to them with a problem or an issue, they need to know also how to respond to it. Because again, you know, as I've just said, you know, not all, you know, families or men or whatever are good at accessing healthcare. So it's very important to be clear about that, and also I think be honest and clear about, you know, having an adult conversation about what's being taught at school and how important this is for the health of their children. So you know, I was a parent of an appropriate aged child at the time, a boy at the time, and you know, it's very useful to think of that from my perception. You want people to, as I say, to diagnose things early, be happy about the body, about self-examining themselves, but it's very important we educate the parents in that as well, really. So that's why we were very keen to do the resources, and I think they're good resources for parents to use, and we can talk later about it, but it's all on a website, so it's freely accessible for anybody to. Well,
let's plug it now.
Is that right?
We'll do it at the end as well, but where can people find all the resources?
We set up a website called testicularhealth.info, and it can be found easily searching it, and there's really good graphics. There's animations there for teachers and parents and children to watch. So what I'd say to people is if you find a conversation about this difficult with your children or members of your family, you can actually just get them to watch it. So sometimes it helps people have some difficult conversations, if it's not being taught in a school near you, and you want to obviously help protect your child against this or educate them in these areas. Parents can do that using these resources on the site. There's freely available videos. They're very well produced. We did them with a group from the Royal College of Art.
There's no actual human pictures.
No human pictures. It's all animation. It's all safe.
Weird.
It's all been properly assessed.
Yeah.
As being appropriate, age appropriate, and it's just a resource that's out there that everybody use. It would be really useful.
That will do it for part 1 of our double header from Highgate School. Tune back in if you enjoyed that one. To part 2, we've got plenty more on the way.